For decades after his book, most astronomers simply suspended judgment. The reason was that there was no observational evidence that the Earth moved. In fact, it seemed almost silly that the Earth moved.
In the Copernican system, the Earth was never still. It had two separate motions, revolving around the Sun each year and spinning on its axis once each day.
Copernicus was a little bit reluctant even to publish his system because he figured there would be a lot of criticism of it.
The thing that Copernicus suggested just made him really the laughing stock of Europe, because he was saying here is the Earth is actually whizzing round at a huge speed, about 700 or 800 miles an hour. That's just going round on its axis, and in addition it's going round the Sun at about 30 miles a second. I mean, they were saying this is just absolutely ridiculous. I mean, look at the ground, it's as solid as you can see. Clearly the Earth is not moving. Nothing could be more obvious than the fact that the Earth isn't moving. If it was moving, everything would be flying off it. I mean, church steeples would fall down, birds couldn't keep up with it, clouds would go disappearing over the western horizon and things like this.
Galileo had read Copernicus and already suspected that the Copernican system was correct. But even with his telescope, he did not see a way of proving that the Earth moved around the Sun. First, he would make a move himself, back to Tuscany, the land of his birth. Florence, the Tuscan capital, held a great attraction for the rising young star. The exalted home of Dante and Michelangelo, Florence had been ruled for centuries by the Medici family. A source of great wealth and power, the family dominated banking and commerce and was influential in church matters. The spheres of the Medici coat of arms adorned palaces throughout the city. For Galileo, there could be no greater honor than to have as a patron Duke Cosimo de' Medici.
Galileo is looking for social improvement, and he has tried several times to get patronage from de' Medici, and here he sees his ticket. The Grand Duke of Tuscany is one of four brothers. Galileo has discovered 4 moons around Jupiter. Shrewdly wants to name him after his prospective Medici patrons.
A copy of the Starry Messenger, Galileo's finest telescope, and a personal plea are dispatched to Florence.
It is up to our sovereign whether I spend the rest of my days here in Venice or return to Florence. If I'm to return, I desire that your Highness shall give me leave and leisure without my being occupied in teaching. Finally, I desire of His Highness that in addition to the title of mathematician, he will annex the title of philosopher.
Galileo points out how bad his position is at Padua, how he doesn't have any time for research, how he's overrun by students, and what he would like would be to serve a great ruler and to do research.
A few weeks later, a letter was issued from the Medici offices at the Uffizi, inviting Galileo to join the Medici court as mathematician and philosopher. Here he would be at the center of Florentine intellectual and social life.
Florentines were known for arguing about everything, having lively discussions, and that's what Galileo was about. And there was tremendous appeal for him, and even more status in being attached to the court of the Grand Duke. And there were friends of Galileo's who warned him that he wouldn't be as safe in his radical beliefs in Tuscany, that Venice had more of a sense of independence from the Pope than Tuscany had.
The Medicis were rich and cultured, but they were also beholden to Rome. With strong ties to the Vatican, the family had produced many popes and cardinals. They could not have known the difficulties their new philosopher would bring upon himself. Leaving behind his mistress and his young son, Galileo placed his daughter Virginia and her younger sister Livia in the convent of San Matteo at Arcetri outside Florence.
it was not unusual in Italy at that time to put young girls in a convent for safekeeping, to make sure they remained virgins, although it was no guarantee. But because Virginia was illegitimate, her chances for marriage were more complicated than they might have been. She would have needed a large dowry and the proper husband. And Galileo was not a wealthy man.
Young nuns like Virginia were expected to loosen their ties to the outside world. Even their families would be kept at a distance.
To look at what happened to the father-daughter relationship once Virginia had taken her vows gives one a sense of terrible loss, almost a living death. There's a physical barrier between them in this grill. And yet, that again overlooks the tremendous pride of the typical Italian Catholic family then, of having a priest in the family, a nun. You were putting that child in the service of God. And what could be more important?
I would not say that his placing his daughters in the convent was in any sense an act of faith on his part. In fact, it was an avenue of something to do with them, because after all, their mother had only been his mistress. They were illegitimate, hence presumably not marriageable. So what to do? He supported them, but not very lavishly.
Over the course of 20 years, daughter Virginia would write dozens of private letters to her father from behind the convent walls. Galileo's servants carried the letters in baskets of food or clothing. Many of Virginia's letters survive, although all of her father's responses have been lost. Her letters suggest an enduring bond between the two, despite the harsh conditions of convent life.
Most illustrious Lord Father, my room is terribly cold now, and I cannot see how I will be able to stand it, sire, unless you help me by lending me one of your bed hangings, ones that you will not need to use. I am returning the rest of your collars, which I have sewn. I pray that the Lord grant you the greatest possible well-being. From San Matteo in Arcetri, your affectionate daughter.
In contrast to his daughter's life, Galileo's was becoming more comfortable and secure enough to take a risk, even in the doctrinaire atmosphere of Florence. Galileo adopted the view that Copernicus was right. The sun, not the earth, was the center of our planetary system. Months passed as he struggled for a way to prove it.
For him, demonstration was the mark of science. For something to count as a scientific claim, it had to be demonstrated. It had to be conclusively shown to be the case. Anything short of that was called conjecture or opinion.
While he searched for a demonstration, a letter arrived from one of his followers, Benedetto Castelli, suggesting that the planet Venus could hold the key.
My dear Galileo, if Copernicus is correct, and Venus revolves around the sun rather than the Earth, it is clear that she would be seen not unlike the phases of the moon, sometimes as crescent and sometimes not. Pray tell me if with your wonderful telescopes you have noticed such an appearance?
To the naked eye, Venus was just a point of light, but through his telescope, Galileo saw the planet as a disk. Over a period of months, Venus changed from a small disk to a larger crescent. Galileo immediately grasped that in a sun-centered system, This crescent would appear as Venus circled in an orbit between the Sun and the Earth. Venus must be revolving around the Sun rather than the Earth.
With absolute necessity, I had to accept the theory of Copernicus that Venus revolves around the Sun, as do all the planets, including the Earth. No longer did we have to endure